Picture this. You're sitting across from the person you've shared your life with for 7 years. The candlelight flickers between you. The wine glasses are full. He's smiling at you with that familiar warmth you fell in love with. And somewhere deep in your chest, beneath the laughter and the anniversary toasts, a voice whispers, "Something is wrong." You ignore it. You smile back. You take another bite. And that decision, that single moment of doubt you pushed away, becomes the thin line between living and dying. This is the story of a woman who listened to that voice. And it saved her life. Her name was Elizabeth Carter. To everyone who knew her, she was the embodiment of success and grace. At 42, she had built a career most people only dream about. She was the vice president of research and development at a leading pharmaceutical company in Chicago, a position she'd earned through 15 years of relentless dedication, late nights in laboratories, and a mind that never stopped asking questions. Elizabeth wasn't born into wealth. She grew up in a small town in Ohio, the daughter of a high school teacher and a nurse. She learned early that if she wanted something in life, she had to work for it. And work she did. Scholarships carried her through college and graduate school. Grants funded her early research. By the time she was 35, she held 3 patents and had contributed to medications that helped millions of people manage chronic illnesses. She was respected. She was admired. And she believed, truly believed, in the power of love and partnership. That belief led her to Richard Bennett. They met at a charity fundraiser in downtown Chicago on a cool October evening 6 years ago. Elizabeth had been invited to speak about her company's initiatives in affordable medicine. Richard was there representing his investment firm Bennett Capital Group. He approached her after her speech, champagne glass in hand, his smile easy and confident. He told her he was impressed by her work, by her passion for making a difference. They talked for 2 hours that night, long after most of the guests had left. He was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in everything she said. Within 3 months, they were inseparable. Within a year, he proposed to her on the rooftop of their favorite restaurant, the city lights sprawling beneath them like a blanket of stars. She said yes without hesitation. Their wedding was elegant but intimate, just close friends and family. Elizabeth felt like she'd finally found her partner, someone who understood the demands of her career because he had his own. Someone who celebrated her victories and comforted her during setbacks. The first few years of marriage were everything she'd hoped for. They traveled together, hosted dinner parties, supported each other's ambitions. Richard's business seemed to be thriving. They bought a beautiful home in Lincoln Park, a restored Victorian with high ceilings and large windows that filled the rooms with natural light. Life felt complete. Life felt secure. But sometime around their 5th anniversary, things began to shift. It was subtle at first, so subtle that Elizabeth convinced herself she was imagining it. Richard started working later, coming home after she'd already eaten dinner alone. Business trips became more frequent, sometimes with only a few hours' notice. When she asked about his work, his answers grew vague, dismissive even. He'd wave his hand and say something about market volatility or difficult clients, then change the subject. The warmth between them cooled. Conversations that used to flow easily now felt forced. They still shared a bed, but they no longer really saw each other. Elizabeth tried to address it. One evening, she sat him down and asked if everything was okay, if there was something they needed to talk about. He looked at her with those same blue eyes that had captivated her years ago and smiled. He told her he was just stressed, that business had been challenging, that he'd been distant, and he was sorry. He promised to do better. She wanted to believe him, so she did. She buried her unease and focused on her own work, throwing herself into a new drug trial that demanded most of her attention. Months passed. The distance remained. But Elizabeth told herself that all marriages go through phases, that love requires patience and effort. She was willing to give both. Before we go any deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Their 7th anniversary arrived on a cold February evening. Elizabeth had assumed they'd go out to dinner, maybe return to the restaurant where Richard had proposed. But 2 days before, he surprised her. He told her he wanted to cook for her at home, just the two of them. Something special to celebrate their years together. Elizabeth was touched. Richard rarely cooked. The gesture felt romantic, like an effort to reclaim the intimacy they'd lost. On the night of their anniversary, Elizabeth came home from work to find the house transformed. Candles were lit throughout the dining room and living room. Soft jazz played from the speaker system. The table was set with their finest china, white linens, fresh flowers. Richard greeted her at the door with a kiss and a glass of red wine. He was wearing the blue shirt she'd bought him for Christmas, the one that brought out his eyes. He looked happy, relaxed in a way she hadn't seen in months. He told her to go upstairs, take a bath, change into something comfortable. Dinner would be ready in an hour. As Elizabeth soaked in the warm water upstairs, lavender oil filling the air, she felt a wave of relief. Maybe they were going to be okay. Maybe this was the turning point they needed. She came downstairs 40 minutes later wearing a simple black dress. Richard was in the kitchen, moving between the stove and the counter with focused precision. The smell of garlic and herbs filled the house. He turned when he heard her footsteps and smiled. He told her to sit down, that everything was almost ready. Elizabeth sat at the head of the table, the candlelight casting soft shadows across the room. She sipped her wine and watched her husband through the doorway. He looked calm, almost too calm. When he finally brought the food out, it was beautiful. Pan-seared salmon with a lemon butter sauce, roasted asparagus, wild rice pilaf. He set a plate in front of her, then took his own seat across the table. They raised their glasses. He toasted to 7 years, to many more, to the woman who'd changed his life. Elizabeth felt tears prick her eyes. She wanted this moment to be real. She wanted to believe that love could survive distance and silence and doubt. They began to eat. The salmon was perfectly cooked, tender, and flavorful. The asparagus had just the right amount of char. Richard asked her about her day, about the new trial at work. She answered, but as she spoke, she noticed something. Richard had barely touched his food. He was moving it around his plate with his fork, cutting small pieces, but not actually eating, and he was watching her. Not in the way a husband watches his wife over a romantic dinner. There was something else in his gaze, something expectant, something patient. Elizabeth's fork paused halfway to her mouth. A coldness spread through her chest, sudden and sharp. She set the fork down. Her heartbeat quickened. She looked at her plate, then at his. The portions looked different. The sauce on her fish was slightly darker, and Richard, her husband of 7 years, was still watching her with that strange, quiet intensity. She forced a smile and excused herself, saying she needed to use the restroom. Her legs felt unsteady as she walked down the hallway. Once inside the bathroom, she locked the door and leaned against the sink, her breath coming fast. Her mind raced. Was she being paranoid? Was the stress of the past year making her see things that weren't there? But the voice inside her, the one she'd been ignoring for months, was screaming now, something is wrong. Something is very wrong. Elizabeth pulled out her phone with trembling hands. She scrolled through her contacts and stopped at a name. Jessica Morgan, her closest friend since graduate school, someone she trusted completely. Jessica was a toxicologist, someone who understood chemical compounds and their effects on the human body. Elizabeth typed out a message, her fingers shaking. She told Jessica she needed help, that something felt wrong, that she couldn't explain it, but she needed her to come over right away. She hit send. Then she stood there in the silence of the bathroom, listening to the faint sound of jazz music drifting through the house, and waited. Jessica arrived 30 minutes later. Elizabeth had managed to return to the table, to make small talk with Richard, to push her food around her plate without eating another bite. When the doorbell rang, Richard's expression flickered, just for a second. Confusion, maybe annoyance. Elizabeth stood and said it was probably a delivery, that she'd get it. She opened the door and Jessica stepped inside, her face tight with concern. Elizabeth whispered quickly, told her what had happened, what she'd felt. Jessica didn't hesitate. She asked to use the bathroom, and on her way she pocketed a small sample of the sauce from Elizabeth's plate that Elizabeth had discreetly transferred to a napkin. Richard remained in the dining room, his demeanor still calm, but his eyes followed Jessica's movements. After Jessica left with the sample, promising to test it immediately at her lab, Elizabeth told Richard she wasn't feeling well, that she needed to lie down. He nodded, his face unreadable. That night, Elizabeth lay in bed with her door locked, her phone clutched in her hand, waiting. The call came at 2 a.m. Jessica's voice was shaking. She'd found traces of a toxic compound in the sauce, a substance that would have caused organ failure within hours if consumed in the full dose. It was deliberate, it was precise. It was attempted murder. Elizabeth's world collapsed in that moment. The man sleeping down the hall, the man she'd built a life with, had tried to kill her. What would you have done in Elizabeth's place? Could you have ignored that voice inside you, the one warning you that something wasn't right? Have you ever felt that instinct, that quiet whisper of danger, and wished you'd listened sooner? Let us know in the comments. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about trust and survival, and the courage it takes to listen to yourself, subscribe to this channel, because the next story we're sharing will stay with you even longer.